Hi, everyone. It's noon, so we'll go ahead and get started. Sorry about the feedback. It's just Hi there. So I'm Haley Figueroa here in Prevention Services and DPS, and we're your team dedicated to substance abuse prevention and intervention. We host this monthly webinar series on the first Wednesday of every month with the goal of educating parents really around topics that focus on health promotion for youth, as well as addressing anything that could put students at risk. So today we're really excited to have with us our trauma-informed practices team. So we have Dina Zaney and Marcus Spearman that are going to be talking about strategies to support your student that may be experiencing trauma. So a few housekeeping items. So we do have Spanish interpretation available, and the way to access that on Zoom is to go to the bottom toolbar and hit the interpretation button. So please feel free to put into the chat if you have any questions about that. And we will be having about a 30 to 40-minute presentation of slides. And then at the end, we'll be getting the answers to your questions for our panelists. So the way that you enter a question is also on that same toolbar to go down to the Q&A button and enter your question. And we'll be going through those at the end of the presentation. So I'd first like to introduce Marcus Spearman, who works here in DPS. He's the manager of trauma-informed and restorative practices. Marcus has a master's degree in psychology, and prior to becoming the manager, spent the last 4 years working as a dean and assistant principal at the middle school level. Marcus is extremely passionate about working towards changing the student experience through bringing awareness around trauma-informed practice and continuing to disrupt the school to prison pipeline with the use of restorative practice. So we have Marcus, and then additionally, we have Dina Zaney, who's been an educator in DPS for 20 years. She started off as a language arts teacher, teaching reading and writing to our middle schoolers. After teaching language arts for so many years, she really wanted to work with students in a different capacity. Worked teaching drama for the last 3 years in a classroom, and then working towards getting her master's in school counseling. So she's actually been on our team doing substance use prevention as well, and now has joined the restorative practice and trauma-informed practices team as a trainer, which is the position that she currently holds. So I will go ahead and toss it over to the panel. We're so glad you all joined us.
Yeah, Haley, thank you so much for that introduction. And I first want to thank everyone for being here today. I know it's, taking some time out of your, what I know is our busy days. Again, my name is Marcus Spearman. I'm the manager for trauma-informed and restorative practices for Denver Public Schools. And a little bit about the program, the trauma-informed program. This program was born out of the generous support from the Campbell Foundation Fund. The foundation, has given Denver Public Schools the ability to educate staff in the areas of trauma, mental health, safety, and the importance of creating welcoming, supportive climates and cultures for students and staff. And so I'm really excited to have you all here today and talk about some trauma-informed practices. And now I'll turn it over to Dina Zaney.
Thank you so much, Haley and Marcus. I am so happy to be here with all of you today. Thank you so much again for taking the time out of your busy day to be here with us. I saw in the chat, thank you very much for putting in there how you are feeling today. It made me smile when I say I'm surprised by this question. And thank you for putting that in there, because that really brings me to the point of wanting to check in with our children and with ourselves and with each other around us, just to do a simple temperature check to see how we're doing, how we're feeling, because that is one way to get a feel for how we're feeling, and we don't necessarily have to do anything about it. Just simply listening to each other and letting each other know that we are there to listen to each other. So this temperature wheel is elaborate. You can use something like this or something very simple, or just a simple head thumbs up or thumbs down, something that can check to see how we're feeling and where we're at, because that's always a great starting point. Okay, so first of all, I do want to acknowledge that the whole world has been going through some very hard times with the pandemic, and we have to acknowledge that the pandemic has not been equal to all of us. So this time has been harder for some than others, and whatever you're feeling right now is okay and fine. It's okay to have many feelings at once. It's okay to have both good days and bad days. We have to grieve our losses in order to heal. And so this is a good reminder that all feelings are valid, just like the other slide. Everything is valid. And some of us may have feelings that are more positive or negative or neutral, and that's okay. Awareness and naming are always a great first step in creating wellness. So this image here is also great to ask ourselves where we want to be during these challenging times of COVID. I know we were all in the fear zone. Most of us were in the fear zone for quite some time when the pandemic first came about 2 years ago. But most of us now may be fluctuating between the learning zone and the growth zone as we are continuing to strive to learn and educate ourselves about science and evidence-based facts and where we can be in the present moment and being empathetic with ourselves and others. And hopefully we can be in that zone where we can practice patience and gratitude for our own wellness. So we are here today to talk about trauma, how it shows up in our lives, and strategies for parents to implement at home with your children, and also the importance of taking care of yourself, because if you don't take care of yourself, then you can't take care of others. And so we'll be taking a look at all of these strategies in the 45 minutes that we have today, because we're going to have 15 minutes for questions and answers. So I may be going a little fast through some of these slides, but please feel free to use the chat box to put your questions in there. And so today we're going to take a very quick brief look at the framework for trauma-informed practices that DPS uses. We're going to talk a little bit about how caregivers and guardians can help build resilience in youth. We're going to take a look at the four core priorities and then some wellness strategies, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of time to do a mindful minute at the end of this webinar. So these here is the framework that DPS uses to train and to abide by as far as trauma-informed practices go within this district. And so these pillars are the elements that we elevate as a district to make sure that all of our schools and classrooms are trauma-informed. So we take the time to educate all stakeholders the importance of being trauma-informed and prioritizing safe and secure environments, and the power of relationships, the wealth and value of our very diverse school district, and everyone's different perspectives and strengths and beautiful stories that everyone brings with them when they walk through our school doors. And so we also teach the importance of caring for ourselves and building up our own resilience so that we can be there for our students and our children and other stakeholders. So trauma-informed practices is really a mind shift in the way adults view a child and their behavior. And so it's really changing our behaviors, adult behaviors. We believe that behavior is communication, and we want to understand what that child or young person is actually trying to communicate with their behavior so that we are more responsive rather than being reactive. We want to respond to that behavior with empathy and compassion. And so we want to ask, instead of what's wrong with you, to ask what has happened and how can I support you right now? And I like to use the analogy of the flower versus the environment. This came from someone, and I can't remember their name, but an author, but it's kind of like having a flower that is not blooming and it's not growing. So we are not going to try to change the flower to make it bloom and grow. We're going to change the environment in which the flower is sitting in. So making sure it has plenty of sun and plenty of water and nutrition. And so we want to elevate specific protective factors as well that we know will help our children flourish. We know that parents are sources of strength for their children. And we also want our students to connect with a trusted adult at school as well. And so relationships are paramount to our work if we want our children not only to survive, but to also thrive. We also want to give our students the opportunities to build on their strengths and to improve their skills for regulating their brains and bodies and managing their emotions, which is something that we'll talk about in just a minute. And so these are universal practices that really help everyone. It sets the stage for everyone to be more successful, not just those who have experienced challenges or adversities. And so in order to understand how we can be and instill protective factors in our children's lives, we must first understand a little bit about trauma and how it affects the developing brain. And then we can go into the strategies that we can implement in order to help not just those who have experienced trauma, but we'll be helping everyone. And so trauma consists of these 3 E's: events, experiences, and effects, which we'll go into right now. So what is trauma? This is a definition coming from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And it states here that individual trauma results from an event or a set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning, such as their mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. And so these 3 E's really are providing us a framework for how we can look at what trauma is and all of the elements within it. So let's take a look at events. This image here from ACEs Connection captures all 3 realms of adverse childhood experiences. And that's definitely something that you could look up, the history behind adverse childhood experiences. But this study stemmed from this came from a study that began in 1998. I apologize, and Kaiser Permanente did this study. And basically, many studies have been conducted since then. And so we are looking at all 3 realms of adverse childhood experiences, such as what happens at the individual level, individual and household level, what happens within the community level, and what happens in the environmental level. And so as you can see, the leaves of the tree there capture what can happen at the individual or household level, such as abuse or neglect or divorce or homelessness. Then we have the roots that include community and societal adversities. And these are really deeply rooted in systemic injustices, such as a lack of opportunities or a lack of access to quality health care or housing. And then, of course, historical and systemic racism come into play here. And then the third domain that we are looking at falls under environmental crisis, like what we're witnessing with the effects of climate change, for example, such as more wildfires and flash floods. And we can also look at COVID-19 and the global pandemic and how much that has impacted all of us in the whole world today under environmental element. So let's think about all of these adversities that can have a huge impact on all of us, children and adults. And so very quickly, the ACEs study and all of these studies, we know at least 45% of our students have experienced at least one ACE. And 1 in 10 children have experienced at least 3 or more ACEs, which starts to create that greater dose response and that higher rate of physical health or long-term impacts. And so the higher the ACEs, the higher the negative effects. And so COVID is now a collective trauma that we've all experienced. However, how we experience COVID is very subjective. So one student may have experienced it very differently than another. Whatever the case may be, if they have that resilience factor, like having a caring adult, that can buffer some of that toxic stress so that it becomes tolerable. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means. And so again, the pandemic has affected all of us in so many different ways in terms of loss of connections and events. This is very true for many of us, many of our children. We lost the ability to connect with family and friends like we used to. Extracurricular sports and activities were taken away. Many students lost milestones such as proms and graduations or birthdays. And so although many families have been experiencing these difficulties, a lot of families have always been dealing with these losses of resources and these stressors even before the pandemic came. So it's good to be aware of that as well. So these are some of the reactions to trauma exposure. It's not a one size fits all, but it can be expected that both children and adult populations and young, the youth will have some maladaptive or negative reactions to trauma exposure. So individual reactions are influenced not only by the features of the traumatic event itself, but also individual differences in terms of history of trauma exposure, the environmental factors that they live in, and of course, personal factors. And so as you can see on the chart there, our students and adults, depending on their developmental stage, can have a wide range of reactions to trauma that they can experience throughout their lives. So let's take a look at, those were events. Let's take a look at experiences, and we're going to keep this very brief. So we love to use this image here to as an example of what experiences can look like. Everyone's experience of a traumatic event is going to be different. However, we're going to generalize the experiences for all of our students and think about how a child that has experienced so many adversities may be viewing the world. Now, this is how we assume or hope that our kids view the world. These are positive sensory experiences. So we've got flowers, they can smell the flowers, they can hear whistling, the world is bright and happy, adults are safe, but that's just the perception of the world, and trauma has a way of impacting our view of the world and ourselves and others, because this here it may be a way that student that has experienced many challenges and adversities is viewing the world. So a student that is experienced trauma and stress could see that very exact same scene very differently. There have been shifts in the way that the student views themselves and others and the world. And this can even be an appropriate reaction, because their brains, which we'll talk about in a second, have adapted in a way to protect themselves from a scary world. Instead of trust, now you have distrust. and you have hypervigilance, and you have a survival orientation, because that they just want to protect themselves and they don't know any better. And so the reactions that they have to their experiences are adaptive. They adapted that way to survive and to survive anything that may come at them in the future. So these are the effects that prolonged traumatic events can have on a person. In order to understand that, we really have to understand how trauma impacts the developing brain. So the way the brain works, especially a brain that has been affected by chronic trauma, which is ongoing, repeated, and buffered stress. We're going to use this model here. And actually, you may have seen this before in previous webinars, but I'm going to use my hand, and you can teach this to your children, just to like educate them, because that is empowering when you educate yourselves and your students and your children. And I'm using students and children and kids interchangeably here, but I'm going to use the model that Dr. Dan Siegel developed, and the way we explain it is this part right here is the brain stem, and this is the autonomic functioning of part of the brain. So it's in control of heart rate, breathing, and temperature, and things that we don't really need to think about doing because they're automatically happening. And this is also in charge of physical safety. All of our brains are hardwired to keep our bodies safe. If a person is not feeling safe, this is the part of the brain that takes over that stress, and the stress response system is activated. And what I mean by the stress response system, it's that fight, flight, or freeze. Fight, flight, or freeze. And so, for example, think of running into a vicious dog in the middle of the street, or a vicious person. What's going to happen is you're either going to fight that dog or that person. You're either going to run from these terrifying people or animals, or you are going to freeze and hope that they just don't see you and they leave you alone. And so that is our response system to threat. The midbrain is the limbic system, and I'm going to use my thumb and fold it over my palm. This is the emotional part of the brain. This is where the amygdala is located, and this part plays an important role in fear and anger. However, this is the part that is also activated when a person senses relational danger. So danger with other people, with their teachers or with their parents or whoever. So the brainstem and the limbic system are the downstairs brain. And when a child feels physically or emotionally unsafe, this is the part of the brain that hijacks the thinking part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is the learning part of the brain. This is where we want our children to be in order for them to learn and grow. And when this happens, it happens automatically. It's a very quick response. The person will not even think about it. And so the important thing to note here is that a child cannot be in their thinking brain and their downstairs brain. Once this part is activated, it hijacks this part. And that's where the term comes of flipping their lid. They've actually flipped their lid. And this part is running the show now. This part is no longer able to think or do anything logical, like for example, planning or organizing or executing anything. And so this is when we say the person has become dysregulated. And when a person is dysregulated, we definitely need to give them time in order to regulate themselves and to bring that learning brain back to its optimum functioning. Okay, and so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but as you can see, the prolonged adversities and toxic stress has a huge impact on the development of a child. And so, as you can see, it affects various domains there, such as having a smaller brain size and in terms of brain development, difficulty problem solving and language delays. In terms of cognition, they will have sleep and eating disorders, difficulty controlling emotions and forming relationships, and then also anxiety and depression and also mental health. And so our experience of the world is really shaped by the stress that we continue to encounter. Our ability to tolerate stress changes as we continue to encounter stress, especially toxic stress, which hopefully is encountered with the supportive adult to help release that pressure. And so not all stress is bad. We all have stress on a daily basis and throughout the week when we have brief increases in heart rate, and mild elevations in stress hormones like cortisol or adrenaline. But much of it can be very harmful. This could be for example, an immunization shot or preparing for a test or anything that may be stressful to a person. Tolerable stress is more serious stress, yet it's buffered by the supportive relationships around us. So for example, if I experienced an injury, that stress will be tolerable if I have those supportive relationships around me. Now, toxic stress is going back to that prolonged child abuse or neglect or domestic violence or community violence. So it's this prolonged activation of the stress response. So the body is consistently getting that adrenaline or cortisol, which we all know affect our bodies in very negative ways. So we may see a person's body tense up more, or they may get sick more often. Toxic stress leaves a person feeling very, very bad, physically and emotionally. And we can see the impact that toxic stress has on a person. So how does this play out at home? Well, as you can see, we may see students or children with externalizing behaviors because those are their adaptive behaviors. That is what they have learned and how to protect themselves. And they just haven't had time to improve on their skills, the skills that we can build when they are in their learning brain. And so, as you can see on this slide, we can have externalizing behaviors or even internalizing behaviors. So maybe aggressive behavior or very quiet and intrinsic or very quiet behavior. So this here is a great image to kind of understand what we all go through on a daily basis. This is an explanation for our window of tolerance, and that term was coined by Dr. Dan Siegel as well, the same guy that did the hand-brain model. But the window of tolerance is a term that's used to describe the zone in which a person is able to function most effectively. And so when people are within this zone, the green that you see in there on this image, they're typically able to readily receive, process, and integrate information and otherwise respond to the demands of everyday life without very much difficulty. They can access their coping strategies and be in relationships and tolerate some stress like we all have to do on a daily basis. Those that can stay within the window of tolerance may be able to handle intense emotions or situations without feeling like their ability to function has been impacted. And so the window of tolerance can be affected by the environment. It can be affected by people around us. People are generally more able to remain within the window when they feel safe and supported by the environment as well as the people around them. And so those who have a narrow window of tolerance may often feel as if their emotions are intense and difficult to manage. And so dysregulation happens when we exit that window of tolerance, whether it's hyperarousal or hypoarousal. And one thing one thing I do want to mention is that the four core principles that we're going to be talking about today can help keep us within that window of tolerance. And when we exit that window of tolerance, we do have some strategies that can possibly help us to calm down and bring us back into that optimal zone. And so before we go into strategies, this is a great slide to kind of remind us how to prevent these things from happening, how to prevent our students or our children exiting their window of tolerance. And so, for example, things that may escalate, not just children, but any human, right? Like talking negatively about them in front of them, power struggling, needing to be right, or having the last word. Telling kids about consequences too early, harsh tones of voices or body language that communicates that I am powerful and I have that power over you. Ultimatums or sarcasm, or if you don't do this, then this will happen, mimicking, shaming. Any of these things can really set our students off and send them outside of their window of tolerance. There are those on the right side that you see there are calming signals. So things that will help us stay within that window, the green zone. And so like giving time and space and being gentle with your voice and watching your body language, because that speaks volumes, validating, all of these things that you see here can help a student stay regulated and stay within that window of tolerance. Okay, and so although there are many stressful events in our lives, there is hope for a better future. And so we can help our children develop resilience by increasing their positive experiences within the family. And so let's take a look at some of these strategies. These here are the 4 core principles of priorities that will help parents and their children thrive within their home environments. So first one is predictability. We want to keep things predictable for our children because trauma takes away one's sense of safety in the world. Right now, the world can feel very unpredictable, for example, with COVID-19, hopefully it's getting better, or with protests across the nation, or with war, whatever it is. And so keeping predictability as a number one and letting things know, let your kids know what's coming next is always a good thing. And so daily routines, for example, help family life run a lot more smoothly. They help families enjoy more time together. And so it helps children feel safe. It helps them build skills and build healthy habits. And routines help parents feel organized, and it reduces stress. And it helps them find time for enjoyable activities. And so good routines are well planned, regular, and predictable. You can build routines with your children so they know what to expect, and they have some voice in what to expect as well. And so these are just some strategies that you can implement at home to implement predictability in every day. So if you would like, I think I'm gonna skim through these, but we all learn from each other. And so I think you guys can see each other's chat. Please share with each other, reflect. What are some ways that you can create predictability in your homes? And that's just so that we can all reflect on what everybody else does. And again, we learn from each other. Okay, so flexibility is number 2. Trauma causes a loss of control, but being flexible can support in the sense of regaining personal locus of control. I see somebody has just raised their hand. What are some that my child may be experiencing trauma response or reaction? Oh, yes. So I am sorry. I'm going to keep this till the end because we do have some time at the end set aside just for questions and answers. So we'll definitely get to those. So for example, being flexible with students, let's see, because trauma can cause a child to feel rigid and constricted, it's important to be flexible as humans because things change all the time. Nothing stays the same. And so as parents, ask yourselves, what is really important in the home right now? If you were children, would you be able to follow those rules? And who will suffer if there is no flexibility? So in most cases, it would be beneficial to try to be flexible with your thinking and your actions. Some strategies to follow are to notice the child's needs and make decisions about the current moment instead of how you may have always done it. Try to have plenty of choices instead of just one, and involve the children in decision making because that's very empowering when possible. And then if they do offer a suggestion and it works, take them up on it. And if a routine is not working, then just change it. Don't be afraid to change it. And so again, this is just a time for you guys to reflect if you want to put it in the chat. What are some ways that we can create predictability in our homes? Please feel free to put those answers in the chat so that other people can see what you guys are doing. Okay, connection, love this one. As a teacher, this was my #1. So the single most common factor for children who develop resilience is at least one stable and committed relationship with the supportive parent or a caregiver or guardian or other adult. Connection is about building relationships. You're the most important role model that your kids have. Sure, their friends are important to them, but the way you behave and the way you fulfill your responsibilities will have a profound and long-lasting effect on your children. And so we want to look at our children's situations with empathy, curiosity, and openness. And there are so many ways that we can build relationships with our children, and asking them how they are doing on a daily basis, having that time to check in with them is a great way to build relationships with your children. Here are some strategies that'll help you build relationships and connect. So again, create routines and use that time to connect. If you can connect in the morning, ask them how they're doing in the morning, or you can ask them during their meal time together. And so maybe eating meals together and asking them about their highs and lows. I used to ask them about their roses and thorns. Just make it a habit to ask them what went well or what didn't go so well throughout their day, and just simply listen to their story. Take an evening walk together and ask them how their day was. Ask them what they would like to do, what's fun for them. Ask them fun questions, like what made you laugh today? Tell each other jokes, create fun times with each other, create those fun and enjoyable memories with each other, and adventures, and validate what your child is saying. So for example, like, I like the effort that you give your schoolwork, or I understand that you're sad about not being with your friends. So validate. Once they name that emotion, validate it. I hear you, I see you. I understand. And then children need to feel physical safety as well as psychological safety. And so ask your child, what can I do to help you feel safe? And listen to what they're saying and be a role model for them. Stay calm and make sure that you're also taking care of yourself. And so again, this is a time for reflection. Please use the chat box or use the chat box to share a fun moment that you have had connecting with your kids. What do you do? Moving on, because I'm running out of time. Empowerment is super important. We've said that word several times. So trauma involves a loss of power and control that can make one feel helpless and hopeless, and powerless. And rigid expectations can really create barriers to learning and thriving for most students. And so considerations to empower students, give them suggestions. What kind of decisions can you allow your child to make? Allow your child to have options to choose from instead of just one option. Ask your child what they would like to do to make a positive difference in the home. What can they contribute to the community? And let them take action. Allow your child to exhibit their strengths and to build on those strengths. We want to be strengths-based. So by incorporating these real life problems into learning, so that they can contribute and feel like a valued member of the home and the community. And again, here's another time to reflect. How do you empower your child with choices and opportunities to voice his or her opinions, and their wants and their needs? Okay, and I'm gonna skip over some of these. I do want to mention one thing on this slide. There is an opportunity, I guess Colorado just put this out there. You are able to get counseling or therapy for your child if you go to imatter.com to get 6 free sessions for your child. It's pretty easy to sign them up. And if you go to that website, you will be able to connect with a mental health provider, and you can make an appointment for your child and take them in. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. In fact, we encourage that. We have that as well as teachers and DPS employees. We have those free sessions, and we make sure that we utilize them every year because we get 5 a year. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's highly encouraged. This is a great strategy, a circle of control to reduce anxiety for kids and adults. And so this can be used as a reminder of areas that you can control, like the way that you act and what you teach your children and the environment that you can establish within your home. And then the things that you cannot control. And so that puts us in the growth zone when we realize that there are certain things that we can control and things that we cannot, and just to let those things that we cannot control go. I'm gonna move quickly. Okay, so, it doesn't look like I'm gonna have very much time to talk about self-care, but I do want to mention that that this slide deck will be shared with you, and you can go through these and look at some of these strategies. So for example, self-care with ABCs, being aware of your needs and your feelings and your limitations and your resources. So know who can help you out there, balancing, finding that balance of work and play and relaxation, and really taking care of your whole self. And then connection is so important to yourself and to others, and interactions with others is huge. So make sure that we are having those valid connections with each other. I am going to talk a little bit about mindfulness because I love mindfulness. These are just so many slides. I am sorry. I'm going to get through these. This is a great, you're going to have access to this. This is just a great strategy to help regulate oneself. So you name 5 things that you see, 4 things that you feel, 3 things that you hear. This is a video. You can watch it and you could teach it to your children. It's a great strategy to use to help regulate oneself when you become dysregulated, and to just kind of calm down and bring yourself back within that window of tolerance, the green zone. I love this, expressing gratitude. So I am gonna leave that in there. It changes the brain. It's good for you. It helps your immune system. Take a look at that. What are you grateful for today? Woo, I honestly thought that I was going to have more time, everyone, so I apologize for this. And then this is what I really want to get to, and then we're going to open it up for questions. And so practicing mindfulness can be done throughout the day to help you be more present and be more in the moment. And so it can reduce stress on the body and the mind. And when we're practicing mindfulness, our goals are really to be present without judgment and to just kind of be curious about what's happening in the moment. Now, I wish I was going to have enough time to take you through a mindful minute, but there are plenty of resources and videos online that you can look up for guided mindfulness practices or guided meditation. I began with just doing 1 minute a day, and you can add to those, but do that with your children, co-regulate with your children, and that will help them normalize this, and it will help everyone feel so much better. And so I have run out of time. I apologize. There are some different types of mindfulness exercises there, and we're not going to do a mindful minute, and I'm going to end with these mantras. So repeat these over and over again. I love waking up and saying, good morning, you're awesome, I love you. Say any of these things over and over again to help you stay grounded and stay calm and stay positive. And I'm going to end it with that. Oh, and there's also this website on the DPS website for families, so that you can look into that for resources. And thank you.
Hey.
Well, awesome. I'm going to give Dina a break and let her just, take a drink of water. So I'm going to try to answer some of the questions that saw come through during her presentation. And so I'm going to start with a couple that I already answered, and then I'm going to take some of the other ones that are open right now. So I'm going to start with, I got this question came in of, what are schools doing to support students with severe/multiple traumas? Schools are doing tiered supports, including mental health referrals, CBITs, and assessments, and that can include our BEST assessment, which schools are administering to get a baseline for where their students are in terms of trauma, and what we can do to support them. And then another question that came in, what are signs that my child may be experiencing a trauma response or reaction? And this is an awesome question, and it's important to that normal baseline. And so we all know what normal feels like, looks like in our children. I'm going to say students. And so you might see shifts in their normal baseline behavior that could look like isolation, going in that room, not wanting to talk, not wanting to really engage, denial, depression, difficulty focusing, aggression, anxiety. And so I just wanted to, speak to those. And so I know there's a few more, about 4 more that I want to get to as well. And sorry that I'm going so fast. I'm not sure if everyone has access to see the answers that we've already answered in the chat, but if you do, definitely take a look there for that full list of ways to kind of just notice some trauma responses or reactions.
Okay, I saw this question in here. Can we talk in more detail about predictability? Why and how? Okay, that's a great question. So I'm going to go back to that slide. Predictability is a great way to help instill some safety around the psychological safety around what's going to happen within the day so that there are no surprises. We don't want to surprise anyone. We don't want to scare them with anything. We want to help them feel comfortable so that they know what to expect, so they know what's coming at them. I know when things are unpredictable, when I don't know what's going to happen, when I don't know what's around the corner, what's coming up, it makes me feel anxious. It raises my stress level. I feel very stressed out. I feel, not in control. And so having that predictability set in place for everyone in the home is great. Letting them know. I love keeping agendas. I used to do that for my students in the classroom, and I know parents that do that for their children. Having an agenda and letting them know exactly what to expect that day or that week, letting them know that what is expected of them so that they're not rushing to do anything, so they have time to process and reflect and do what is best for them. And so keeping things predictable is safety. It's part of feeling safe. And remember, when they're in this part of their brain, they are feeling unsafe. They have left the learning part. So we want to help our children feel physically safe within their environments, and we want to help them feel emotionally safe. So what I mean by that is your reactions to them are predictable. They know that they can come and talk to you, bring something up with you, and they know that they're going to get a calm and reasonable response. That's predictability as well. So unpredictable behavior, as if I went to my mom and I said something and I was expecting a response, but then it was something that shocked me or that totally sent me out of that window of tolerance, right? So either I jump into excessive anger or I just shut down and I don't want to talk anymore. And so predictability really is about safety, and that is why.
Yeah, Dina, I'm gonna jump in and take there's a couple questions that I think are kind of similar in essence. How does DPS ensure staff use trauma-informed practices? And then there's the other one is, how does DPS ensure staff appropriately use trauma-informed practices with students? How are assessments using trauma-informed practices? Trauma-informed practices are simply best practices, universal practices. They focus on creating safe classrooms and school educators, safe classrooms and school educators are not being, trained to be therapists, but they're trained to be, some of those look fors in trauma. And so what that looks like, again, some of that, denial or kind of just, isolation that are not in what tips are about. Presently, assessments are not being used to kind of evaluate trauma-informed practices. And we're hoping that, we can ramp that up and get schools to, implement trauma-informed practices into some of the systems and strategies that the schools are using to kind of, best support students dealing with trauma. And so, yeah, hopefully if I didn't get all the way to that answer for you that you were looking for, please send me another one and I'll try to get that answered better for you.
Yeah. I see a question here. It says about childhood trauma. Is it true that when a child experiences a trauma that they can mentally remain at that age when that they were during the trauma? So this is a really good question for a professional or a specialist. I am not a therapist myself, but I do know from what I have studied and what I've learned is that prolonged ongoing trauma, severe trauma with unbuffered relations, or excuse me, with without those relationships that can help buffer those experiences, yes, a child, and let me take you to actually that slide where you can see some of the effects that ongoing repeated childhood trauma can cause. So these are some of the effects. These are severe. This is basically what we see when you know, so many, when a child has experienced very many adversities. And so we're talking about chronic and complex trauma, which I did not go into. A one-time incident of something can be overcome, again, with those relationships and with that support. However, if a child is not receiving any support from the environment or from the people in that environment, then yes, they are going to have severe negative effects, which you can see on this slide here. Okay, so I don't see any more questions on here. Oh, okay. Oh, there is. Oh, okay. No, that's it. You do? Okay.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, Haley here again, substance use team. So another question coming in, what does restorative practice or trauma-informed response look like when a student is using substances? So really good point. And we know, you know, our team is really focused on substance use prevention and intervention. So we know that between the ages of 10 to 14, oftentimes students will present with a mental health issues such as depression or anxiety. And when we don't get treatment, or when kids don't get treatment for those issues, you know, they could go on to use substances. So we actually really in our program obviously promote protective factors, but we also, you know, kind of the reason that we're hosting this session for parents is that we do really want to educate both parents and students that, you know, mental health issues, trauma, and other things that can happen sort of in that early childhood or middle childhood can really contribute to students not developing the skills or getting the skills they need. And then when they have access to substances, such as is true in, you know, as students move into high schools, they're starting to be surrounded by peers who are using. We know that that puts our students at risk for substance use. So definitely a part of what we're trying to do from our team is to educate our parents on how to get help for their students. So I don't know if that was a perfect answer, but I think a lot of what Dina addressed can really help students. So having like a strengths-based approach, teaching students some of the mindfulness strategies, self-regulation strategies, all of the practices that she talked about are going to help students to gain skills to further kind of resist substances. And when students are using substances, our team can provide intervention. So we use a program in schools called Teen Intervene. So it really kind of looks at the why of the use. So really supporting kids in decision making and look at why they're using. To be able to kind of put into place a plan to help them not to cope with substances, but to have some of these other healthy coping mechanisms as well.
And I also wanted to mention that I am, we didn't see them in this deck, but I believe that this slide deck will be, this presentation will be shared with you. And I am going to insert some slides that speak to several different breathing strategies and regulation strategies. So when a child or a person has become dysregulated and they've gone to their downstairs brain, what can we do at that moment? Breathing is my favorite one. Breathing and movement. And I can put those slides in there and you could just click on those slides and you can see an example of what that may look like. You can probably watch a video. I've put in kind of quite a few resources in there. And then I do see one other question here before we get off, if you want to answer.
Yeah, BFAC, I definitely see you, and I want to get you a solid answer on this. And so if you want to just drop your email in here, we can try to find some time to connect, and I can answer this question a little bit more formally for you. I just don't want to give you some, here's an answer and it not be, concrete. I want to be able to give you a solid answer, if that's all right.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We are going to be back on the first Wednesday of April, focusing on behavior and as communication. So kind of a continuation of this conversation. And Leah will send out the slides as well as the recording and information about our next month's session. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure being here with you.